What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the Devy Podcast. We are back with our Devy podcast. Me and Jay Stein dropping your content here for Devy and college football. We're a little late on this one. That's on my end. I went to the Michigan game this weekend. We got a little bit busy there, but I thought it'd be fun. What we're going to do today is we're going to be talking about our panic meter. So, midway through the year now, like who are some guys that we're really panicking on? We did a very unofficial panic meter. I kind of said, hey, throw your numbers in there. Where are you at? And we're going to be talking about 5 guys that where they got drafted, how we're feeling about them in their leagues. Are we worried? Are we not? I mean, me and Jay are probably different, in terms of what we expected from these guys. But we're going to be going through these guys and see how we feel. So first one up, Mika Hudson, baby, like wide receiver out of Texas Tech, freshman coming in, 5-star kid, was the number 2 wide receiver in most cases and out there right behind Jeremiah Smith. And I know most people like Ryan Williams, he was not. I mean, Hudson was higher ranked coming in. When we're looking at the panic meter overall, I had him at a 5, Jay had a 3, so I averaged that out at 40%. When you look at the numbers, 6 catches, 85 yards, and I think part of people's worry is look what these guys are doing. Look what these other true freshmen are doing out here, especially Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. And they see Hudson just not getting out there on a team that's 5-1, that looks pretty good, has had some shootouts, has had game scripts where you're like, hey, I expect Hudson to be out there. So where are you at in terms of Hudson in general, Jay?
My panic meter is a little bit lower than you, only because I like to give the freshmen a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And so there's extenuating circumstances here in this case. So he missed all of spring football rehabbing from a minor offseason knee surgery. So you have that with it. And then the other piece of it is, this head coach, McGuire, he likes playing those veteran wide receivers. He trusts those veteran wide receivers, and so they're getting the early playing time. You got Josh Kelly, Caleb Douglas, Coy Eakin, who is actually having a really good season, and Jordan Brown. And so far, that the trust has been with those sort of veteran type wide receivers. But I think they're starting to see a little bit more from him as he gets more on the field and starts producing. Right now he only is a less than 4% target share on the season. So not great, obviously, relative to some of these other freshmen that are going off. That's tough, but there are some signs when he's out there running routes. He's run 31 routes so far this season. He's getting targets. So when he's on the field running routes, he's getting targets. His targets per route run is 0.29. So like being above the like a 30% or close to a 30% on targets per route run is pretty great. We just need to see that elevated route run over time. And I think he's a good enough athletic profile and, as a player that he'll start getting on the field. But and then his first downs per route run is a 0.10, so 10%. So that again is good. So when he's out there running routes, he's getting targeted, he's completing, they're going to him, he's making first down. So that's like the positive side. The negative side is he really, really hasn't done much, and most of the production has come from those veterans. So he's got the low weighted dominator, low reception yards per team pass attempt, low EPA per play. So it's not there yet. And the hope is, and I think there are slivers of hope here, and which is why my panic meter is pretty low, because I want to give him some time to get into this season, some distance from the minor offseason knee surgery, and we'll see where we are by the end of the year. But I still am pretty high on Micah Hudson going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Joey McGuire he tends to play as veterans. He's talked about that enough, the head coach, and talks about kind of putting the guys out there. He has called them generational, but damn it, I want to see that field. Give me that generational talent out there, right? Like that's where I think he has earned a lot of snaps when you're looking at it. Like when you're thinking of like the last few games, you've seen more snaps there, but only playing like just over, I think 40 snaps where it's at or wherever it is. Like that is worrisome. And I think that when you're looking at it from a perspective of like what Ryan Williams has done, who was a 2nd-round Devy pick, right? Yeah, and he was a guy that, like, especially in like freshman drafts, he was a guy that was getting drafted behind Hudson. I think you have buyer's remorse sometimes. Cam Coleman also, like, you kind of have these like, hey, he's had at least some type of production where Hudson is not. I think for me, I'm just a little higher because I've seen guys like this before, and I still like Hudson. I still believe in him. I think he's talented, but I have seen where opportunities, and this is what we were worried about with Texas Tech, going to these schools where it's like he had plenty of offers for other schools. I wish he would have gone to those schools that are going to have that production, have that ability to get in the field. And I guess I've just been hurt by guys with this profile. 6 foot 195, super athletic. Where's the production, right? Damon DeMoss comes to mind. Some of these other guys that have come, the Florida State wide receiver that I'm losing off the top of my head. I know he had some off-field stuff, but there's other guys out there that we've seen just not take off of this profile. Jurion Dickey from recently. Now he's a little bigger, but just kind of that, oh man, did we miss this, right? Because there's always going to be misses in this format. I still think he's talented, but damn it, I got to get on the field. Like he's gotten some of these targets there. Now, I do think he's a buy low. So if you play this format and you're like, hey, can I add him? Yes. Like I think that is definitely an opportunity there to go get some guys, to get him on your roster, especially if you're not a contender. If you have like a veteran piece, like a running back 2 or 3 guys that I was like Chase Brown, for example, I wrote about him. Like if you have like a guy like Chase Brown, you have maybe possibly some other like veteran guy, Spencer Rattler, like you have starter now, and you're really not a contender, and you want to package them for a deal with Hudson. There's ways to do that now. Like I think there's opportunities now, which you didn't have before. All right, let's talk about your guy because you like this kid. You like this quarterback from Michigan State, Aiden Childs or Chili's? How do you? I think it's I mispronounced it. Childs, I hope so, because I get all kinds of DMs, you guys talking crap to me about me not pronouncing names right. But Aiden Childs, sophomore quarterback out of Michigan State, 6'3", 217, came in with his coach over there, from Oregon State this year. When you just look at the raw numbers, 1,200 yards, the 5 touchdowns, the 8 interceptions, that worries you a little bit. I have him at 9. You have him at 7. I did not average this out correctly, but I'm not a mathematician on this show. So we have 90% panic meter here. So you liked him. So you liked him here. So give me your reason why you think you're a little less concerned than I am.
First of all, were you thinking about Destin Hill at Florida State wide receiver?
Yes,
Destin Hill.
Yes,
yeah. So coming into the season, I had a lot of hope for Aiden Childs to sort of take over this Michigan attack and really flourish. But mostly because he had all the skills that you look for out of a quarterback, and you hadn't seen it very much in a production. But at Oregon State last year, behind DJU, they were having a hard time keeping Aiden Childs off the field. They wanted to get him on even when he was a freshman, a true freshman, and so the hope was very high this season. But unfortunately, it has not shaped up really well. And I'll caveat this a little bit, but. Just some stats here. So if you take quarterbacks that have 100 or more dropbacks in this season, he has the worst turnover-worthy play percentage. He's the 12th worst in adjusted yards per attempt. He's the 8th worst in completion percentage and adjusted completion percentage. His completion percentage is 56.2%, which is not very good.
No.
He's the bottom half in QBR, bottom half in the NCAA in QBR, EPA per play, PFF pass grade. It is not great from a numbers perspective this year. And so, the color is, coming over from Michigan State this year from Oregon State to Michigan State with his head coach. He's really, if you watch the games, he has really good arm strength. He's been feeding freshman Nick Marsh this year, and Nick Marsh looks good as a freshman. Oh my gosh. Added to the list of just incredible freshman performances this year. When you're watching him, he makes phenomenal plays and evades players with his feet on the ground. He can turn a play that looks like a 10-yard sack into a 2-yard gain pretty easily, and it looks special when he's doing it. But he really does need to develop as a passer because the 56% completion percentages just will not do. And he's sporting the worst turnover-worthy play in all of turnover-worthy play percentage in all of NCAA. So he has the 8 interceptions. Also tack on 3 fumbles while he's running around there. That is not great. But the bright spots are that he's young. He's only a sophomore here. So there's plenty of time to develop that. And he does have the natural skills to do that. So obviously, clearly not the season we were expecting. There's so many stats that I could point to, which is just very disappointing from him. But especially coming in with what I had was pretty high expectations. But he's young. There's a long season to go to develop. and he can.
Yeah.
But the turnover worthy plays, the low completion percentage, the development as a passer really needs to step up significantly for him to have any sort of NFL sort of potential going forward, because he's got the arm, he's athletic enough, and he could be something special with his ability to move on the ground. But right now, I don't see it in the numbers. So
I think the reason why I'm probably the most concerned as I go, because I hate quarterbacks. You know that. I hate Devy quarterbacks. I'm just like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not going there with the value. I thought he was someone that a lot of people talked about 2 years ago. And I think he got drafted a little overdrafted 2 years ago. And then I think people bought into that hype coming to Michigan State, and they were like, hey, yeah, he's going to be there. And he's going to struggle. To me, he's a 4-year kid now. Like, I don't see him like, unless he takes a massive leap next year, you're probably looking at another year asset. That worries me from a value perspective, right? Like, when we think of his July ADP mid-fifth, I'd be shocked if he's top 10 rounds next year, like the way he's playing, right? Like in Devy perspective. So you definitely have that value drop there. He is young, though. I'm not crapping on him total. I think for me, it's the quarterback position. It's those expectations that he's had. I also think in Jonathan Smith's offense, when you're thinking of like what they like to do, I think they've opened up. I like Marsh. We actually talked about Marsh, if you remember right. Like we actually mentioned him as like a guy to kind of like a value guy back in there. That's why you should listen to the show if you play the format. And I like what they're going to do, but play action, heavy play action. I think it's going to be run heavy. Now I like his ability to kind of use his feet. I think that's part of fantasy, and that's part of that. He's going to have those plays on the ground. He's going to do that. But if he's going to be a Devy relevant guy, he's got his arm. It's one of those things with his arm. He's got to be able to develop that arm strength, develop the accuracy, develop all the things that you're looking there. Now, he has a great staff around him. I just get worried when we're talking about, all right, another year you're waiting on this guy. Like, he's untradeable, I think, in Devy. Like, I think if you're trying to get any value back, you're not going to get that 5th round ADP value back. And that just worries me a little bit. That's kind of where I'm at with this. Like, I wouldn't have drafted him in Devy. I wouldn't even touched him. I don't touch those quarterbacks in that range for the most part, but he's not done yet, but I'm extremely worried. Like, I mean, I think that if he struggles down the stretch, he's playing some tougher teams, Michigan, some of these other guys, what does that look like? And if he completely struggles, I think he could be in for a QB battle next year. I don't think it's far and done that, like, hey, they might not bring in a transfer guy. I know John Smith loves the guy, but there is like that possibility.
Yeah, I mean that's just kind of tough from where we were at the beginning of the season to where we are now. It kind of is a stinker, but the hope is, like you said, probably untradeable, so you kind of hold on to him and then hope he develops into something. Like Anthony Richardson wasn't that great of a passer, but he was able to put some games together towards like the end of his sophomore season, and then had an okay junior season. But people saw the talent there, and I guess maybe you hope for something like that, because he definitely has the skills on the ground to be something good at a quarterback. But it's just hopefully he can develop on the passing side.
All right, let's jump over to Jaden Ott. And I think this is an interesting one. Running back out of Cal. Some people had Jaden as a top 3 guy of the class before the season. When you look, he's been banged up. So one thing to note about him, been a little banged up in terms of his, he had an ankle injury. I blame myself. I was at that game. I think I caused that. It was a little bad mojo there. I hasn't seen the production that we saw last year, over 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. This year, just over 130. 3 touchdowns. From a receiving standpoint, still has that big touchdown against Miami that you saw, the 75-yarder. You see the upside in him. He's got that explosion. He has that pretty good size, 6 foot 210, if the books aren't cooked there, as we like to say here. Now you and me are pretty close, 5 and 4. We're at like that 45% panic meter. Like, a little worried, but I with running backs, I tend to think if you're elusive enough and you have explosion and like you're going to test well, look at what some of these guys are doing in the league, even if they're day 3 guys. Like, to me, Jaden Ott feels like a guy that, like, I'm okay. Like, he's not producing, but we've seen him produce. He's had the big numbers for the first 2 years of his career. He has that explosiveness. He's finding himself on a roster. He's still going to be fantasy relevant. That's probably where my area comes in. And he had that injury, so it could be even lower for my panic. I think he's still a talented player. It's just I hope he comes out. I hope he doesn't go the Devin Neal route, because you see what happened with the Devin Neal as we looked at Kansas.
Yeah, I think it's just like there's such a stark difference between what he did his first 2 years and this year that it's just what's going on here. And you mentioned the possible ankle, leg injury in Cal that's maybe affecting him going throughout the season. But so far over the season, sophomore Javavian Thomas has almost as many carries as Ott,
Mm-hmm.
and more than twice as many rush yards and more than double the yards per carry. So he's significantly outperforming Ott on pretty similar carries so far this season. And you also have the QB with almost as many as carries as him as well.
Yeah.
Where last year, there was just a huge stark difference here because last year he had 246 attempts and he was seventh in total rush attempts in the Power Five, and it's just completely the opposite this year. So is that leg injury sort of carrying through? I'm not sure, but just to give you an idea here, so if you take running backs with more than 45 attempts this season, Ott has the fewest rush yards in the Power Five on that. He's the second fewest yards per game, the worst yards per attempt, the worst yards after contact per attempt, the fifth worst elusive rating out of all the running backs in Power Five, with running backs greater than 45. So maybe it's the leg injury. Maybe they're sort of saving him and trying to get him back right. But there's something going on. It is a very stark difference from last year. And that's sort of why my panic meter isn't higher, is because we saw him do it the first 2 years. And so year 3 falling off, especially if it's injury related, it's not as big of a hit because he already did the production in those first 2 years. But
Yeah.
You can't be an NFL prospect and have an average 2.9 yards per attempt for an entire season. It's just that's just not the way it works. So my hope is that he gets better, like healthier, and finishes out the season like we know he can, like he did those first 2 years. But so far, I mentioned where he is basically worst at a lot of different categories for running backs over 45 attempts. And so it's not looking good so far this season, and hopefully that turns around.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks because a lot of people were calling. I mean, some had Heisman hopes, like the Genty stuff. That was odd. Like we heard that a little bit.
Yeah.
We heard the ACC running back of the year. And I mean, again, that injury definitely plays a role. Like when you're thinking of running backs, you're thinking about like any type of ankle, lower leg. That's going to linger, and he's still probable this next week too against Pitt. Like there's probabilities. You see the explosions. So part of me is that, but the biggest worry for me, like that's why I'm at a 5. Because if he comes back, Jay Stein has ruined running backs for me. Because if they come back in their 4th year, I'm getting a little nervous in terms of, and really the Devin Neal thing makes me nervous because they're pretty like both of those guys probably from a production standpoint and just from like a play style, they're very similar. Like I and Devin Neal are very similar there. I think they even come in at the same weight and height. I'm pretty sure it's close. I think if I had to guess, Neal was at 215. Off the top of my head. I could be wrong. Fact checkers out there are probably like, you're an idiot, but somewhere around that range, like just play style, everything there. That's what worries me the most because I think Neal took a hit to that production standpoint. And the other thing is this class, the running back class as a whole is super deep. I love the running back class. The 25 class has a lot of different guys in it. So he's going to have to stand out from a production standpoint too. You're going to tell me how much?
Yeah.
Devin
No,
Neal
I mean,
weighs?
Oh yeah, that's right. 215. PFF has him at 215. So you were right on the
Shout out
number.
PFF. PFF's never been wrong. PFF grades never been wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that this class is such a deep running back class, and we've talked about that a couple times, there is so much talent from top to bottom. There might be 10 guys that could be NFL type guys coming out in this next class. And I would, when I started the season, I'd say Jaden Ott is probably one of those. I think he's probably still one of those 10 guys, but it makes it tough if you have a season that isn't quite as good as the most recent season when you're going through the draft evaluation process. And so you figure out how that goes. But yeah, I mean, tons of production, just absolutely tons of production, and receiving production as well out of Jaden Ott his first 2 years. So it's like he's a good prospect, just not like excited about what's going on this year so far.
Yeah, this year's not been fun. That's why we're doing panics. Like, hey, how panicked are we? I'm cautiously optimistic for him, probably because I liked him last couple years. I really was high on him coming in his freshman year. All right, let's go over a guy that I am terrified right now. Panic meter is pretty high for me because as a prospect, Tennessee wide receiver Squirrel White came into this year as kind of like a sleeper to me because production was there last year. He had the 96 targets, 803 yards, the 2 touchdowns. And I was kind of like, you know what? In this offense, if Nico takes that next step, which he's done, Nico has taken that next step as a quarterback. He's looked good. Obviously, not last week against Arkansas. That's notwithstanding. But like, Squirrel White, I was like, you know what? He can definitely come in there and be that slot guy, kind of be that predominant guy in the slot, which he plays. He's 90% in the slot there, create that separation, get that. Now, he came on a little bit against Arkansas, so we did see his best game. He had 10 targets, 7 catches, 38 yards only, though. That's not a fun, like when you're looking at the numbers, 5.4 yards reception. A lot of it was quick passes. When you're looking at the ADOT in that game was 8.4. So you did see some down the field. But he's struggled this year. And at 170, at 5'10", being a 3-year guy, it's kind of looking trending now coming back to school, right? Before it was kind of like, oh yeah, he could be that junior coming in there. So you and me are both nervous. I mean, we both put 8s kind of on this. We were a little worried about Squirrel White.
Yeah, I mean, last year, Squirrel White was Joe Milton's favorite target, and they were passing the ball a lot. So he had nearly double the targets as the next highest pass catcher last year. This year, White is still leading in receptions by 1 after that special or that Arkansas game where he got a ton of targets. But 4th in receiving yards on the team so far. So he has the most receptions by 1, but the 4th highest receiving yards. And the targets just this year are much more evenly spread versus last year, spread out between the wide receivers versus last year where Squirrel White was double the next highest guy. So Deontay Thornton Jr., Brew McCoy, and Chris Brazzell they're basically even on the season with all 4 of those guys. And so it just nobody's sort of commanding the market share that you'd love to see from a guy that goes on to be an NFL receiver. So if you look at wide receivers that have 20 or more targets in this season, he's 8th worst in the Power 5 on weighted dominator and 15th worst in EPA per play. So just some of the stats that I look at, he is not performing well versus where he did last year. And it's a little disappointing. Now, he's being pretty efficient. It's not like crazy efficient, but he has a 0.22 targets per route run. So when he's running routes, he has 91 routes on the season. When he's running routes, he's getting the targets at a 22% rate. So it's not terrible. I think it's just the offense is just much more evenly spread, and he's not commanding such a high percentage of the offense like he did last year. So really what you want to see is the targets per route run closer to 30, probably higher if you can, and a weighted dominator. His is right now at 10. You'd love to see that at closer to 30 as well. And it's just not there this season. So, on those like age adjusted thresholds for his year 3, he's going to be quite a bit below the line so far, unless things really turn around here. Because, at 14% target share, he is not commanding all of the offense that you need to see. And so, I guess the panic meter is a little high. He is sort of a smaller guy. Like you mentioned, this probably signals that he comes back for another season. So you just have sort of a smaller guy that didn't hit in year 3, but hit in year 2. So that's kind of nice. But then, he's going to be a 4th-year guy. That does raise the panic meter a little bit for me for him. The only hope is that he takes over here and he finds that relationship with Nico that he had with Joe, and he just starts eating. And if he can turn it around, there's still time in the season to do it. But it is a little bit of a difference between what we saw this year versus what we saw last year from him.
I think part of the issue that you mentioned last year, I mean, Joe Milton is terrible. I'm going to put it out there as a quarterback, and with the room, Dante was banged up a little bit. Dante Thornton Jr. was banged up a little bit. Brew McCoy obviously broke his ankle. That was a problem there. And Chris Brazzell, it wasn't there yet. So really it was White. Like White was their guy. That's where the targets went because really he was there. Now, what worries me is those guys are back and White's kind of on the outside looking in. He's not commanding that. Like that's kind of where I'm like, when you're looking at context, narrative, kind of going over, okay, why are these things happening? That's part of the problem. And just to create the separation too, like if you're going to be a small guy, you better create separation during targets, because that's the role, right? We talk about other guys, Tank Dell, some of these other guys that we've seen, the weighted dominating rating, the stuff in college that we like to see. He's not doing that. Now, could he come back? Yeah. I mean, he's on track for 4 years now. Like, that's pretty much where I see it. Even if he really comes out, I have a hard time seeing in this offense with their schedule, unless he has some massive games coming up, which he possibly can, which I hope he does, because I have him a couple of Devy rosters. So it'd be nice to be able to have value back. But again, you were pretty getting him at like mid-ninth, like, July, mid-ADP, kind of going in that range. Like, he's not a total loss because he's still on a high-powering offense that you want to buy pieces in, and he still has a skill set. He's shown he's created separation, being a slot. A team might like that. But I would say, like, out of everybody on this list, we got one more person to talk about. I mean, outside of the quarterback, because I just hate quarterbacks. I mean, he's probably the most panicked I'm about in terms of just, hey, he's not recovering here. He's kind of like Antonio Williams from Clemson. He kind of reminds me, they're the same guy. Like, he's a little bigger, obviously, Antonio Williams is, but that value perspective, you're ringing in your head like, okay, can he make that next step, or is he going to come back in another year? This could be another slot guy, right? I think that's the question that you have to answer yourself there. All right, we're going to talk about tight ends, because the tight end class, the 25 class, is a little suspect out there. And we got to talk about this guy, Oscar Delp, Georgia tight end. Some had him as tight end 1 coming into the year. Going to replace Brock Bowers. At times last year looked okay. The 29 targets, 24 catches, 284 yards, and 3 touchdowns as a sophomore. And they said, hey, you know what? Brock's leaving, but it's okay. We got Delp. Well, Delp has not been great this year. The 5 games, the 9 targets, 3 catches, 25 yards, which isn't great. When you think of like the touchdowns have been there as well, like that's been okay. But target share is not great. I mean, people thought of him as kind of ADP wasn't really that big of a concern with Delp. I mean, tight ends don't really get drafted anyway. He was going 10th or later. But I think people thought he was going to be that guy. Now, I have it at 5, and you have it at 7. I'm less concerned a little bit. I'll kind of go into that after Jay kind of talks about it. But why are you really concerned? 7 worries me with the Jay Stein panic meter here.
This is, I mean, I guess tight ends really, it comes down to draft capital and athleticism at the end of the day. But what I like to do is, and you see this through all the data stuff, is just sort of collect data and see, if they're performing. And so far, it's been a really bummer of a year from the Georgia tight ends, which we thought was going to be pretty great. So it's just sort of confusing that that's the way that this has sort of worked out. Oscar Delp looks like he may have suffered an ankle sprain against Tennessee Tech in week 2, and I'm not sure if that's lingering or not, but he does seem to have pretty good PFF run blocking grades, which is, I guess, nice to see. But really what we care about for fantasy tight ends is we'd like to see him running routes and producing a little bit on those routes. And so right now he's less than 40% slot rate. Lawson Lucky has similar targets to him, but Lucky has converted so far in terms of turning those targets into receptions and yards. And Delp has not done that. So if you look at any of the tight ends in NCAA that have greater than or equal to 9 targets, those are I do 9 because that's how many Oscar Delp has in 2024. He's the 5th worst in target share in the Power 5. He's the worst in receiving yards, the 2nd worst in yards per route run, the 8th worst in targets per route run, the 3rd worst in first downs per route run, the worst in PFF receiving grade, and the 2nd worst in weighted dominator reception yards per team pass attempt, EP per play. So like it's not a great season for somebody that has run 86 routes to only convert to get 9 targets at 5.2 target share and really only get 3 receptions for 25 yards over those 5 games. That is very disappointing for those that had Oscar Delp at tight end 1, if you had him there, or were just excited from, Brock Bowers moving on, Ladd McConkey moving on, and what these guys could do in that slot. And it really hasn't converted from Oscar Delp. Actually, Lawson Lucky actually looks a little bit better at the tight end position at Georgia this year. And then Ben Urasek is really sort of been non-existent as well. So, that's, I mean, I guess a tough pill to swallow for anybody that was betting heavily on the Georgia
Yeah.
tight end room this year. So that's kind of why I'm a little concerned. I, like I said, when I started, draft capital, athleticism, that can change my view pretty quickly on here, but like it's nice to see some production from the tight ends as they go through their years in college. And this has not lived up to expectations for Delp this year so far.
No, I mean he's definitely disappointed. Like first and foremost, like what he's done has not been good. And I think the problem is like they really need their tight ends to step up in an offense. They had this, especially with all the off the field stuff they got with their wide receivers. They just lost another wide receiver this week. So Delp, come on, man, earn those targets, get out there. Like I think when you're thinking of that, I mean Benjamin Urasek has also been a disappointment. I mean you could put panic meter to 100 on that bad boy because I don't know what is going on there. Like I don't know if he's banged up, I don't know if the injury's been a problem. But yeah, ankle sprain is not going to help Delp at all. But I think the biggest thing is just not earning the targets when the targets should be there. Like the target share should be there, and especially in this offense that needs someone that they're looking to go to. And historically have done. I mean, I know Brock is one of those guys. Like Brock is he's an outlier. He's that guy. But you would expect Delp to have just more, right? We think Darnell Washington. Look what Darnell was able to do, and he was not a good receiver. Like their ability to get in the football. I do know they had a different offensive coordinator than Mike Bobo now. It's kind of a different area there. But when you listen to the advanced numbers, you get a little nervous when you're saying second worst. Like that's definitely part of the issue with Delp. I don't think like you're hurting from a value perspective because the reason why I had 5. Kind of to your point too, like, yeah, the draft capital matters. That's going to be there. I think that he definitely is a very solid blocker, in my opinion. Like he's a good tight end. So if you're looking at just from an inline perspective, can he get on the field? Can he stay there? Will he get drafted there and then develop into a solid guy? Yes. I do think his ceiling's hurt though. Like I think people came in with Delp like, hey, he might be able to come in as a top 12 tight end. And now you're like, maybe that's like a tied in two with a touchdown upside type of player. And I think that's kind of where I look at like his prospects, his value right now. Tight ends are so hard though. It's really the testing. Like, how is he going to test what he would look like there? But I mean, I would argue probably 4-year kid at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could happen, but yeah, probably 4-year guy now.
And that's tough. That's tough there. All right. Anything else? Any of these other guys here for our panic meter, or maybe a guy we haven't talked about you want to throw out there?
No, we had a list of a bunch of guys that aren't meeting expectations so far this season, but it was nice to just kind of go through them and sort of talk through some of these, how panicked we are. But pretty good discussion, I think, and hopefully, I guess the comment I'll make is, these kids are young. Some of them are only sophomores. They'll develop. Don't go crazy. Don't sell at extremes or buy at extremes. Try and stay level headed on the panic meter. But obviously, on some of these guys, we're a little panicked on.
I think, yeah. I mean, if it's all about fluid and open windows. Remember, if a guy is an underclassman, you never sell now because spring hype is always available. Like there's always going to be that spring game, that whatever that could get that value bump. Like a guy like Childs or some of these other guys. I do think a guy like the pre combine hype will help you if he does declare. Like there's little windows that you can find that you can say, hey. But I will say I'm actively buying Hudson. If I can actively buy Hudson, I don't mind diving into that. He's not, he's actually put up some production. It's not like it's zeros across the board. There is definitely part of that in there. All right, before we get out of here, though, Jay's team's got a big game. My team is ass this year. If you guys lose to Michigan this year, Ryan Day deserves to be fired. I hate to break it to you. We can't make a forward pass. But Jay's team, Ohio State, finally playing somebody. There's somebody on your schedule worth playing. I'm so happy for the Buckeyes that they're able to join us here in 2024. They're at Oregon at Autzen Stadium there. 5-0 both teams, number 2 versus 3 teams in the country. Kind of probably for the Big Ten title, at least regular season title. It's going to be close. I know Penn State's out there, some of these other guys. Ohio State's a 3-point favorite here. Where are you leaning your unbiased take here? And then I will share my unbiased take here.
No, it's going to be completely biased, but I can't really help that much. But I think if you're looking at it unbiasedly throughout this season so far, you mentioned Ohio State not having much on their schedule so far, so that is a little bit of a thing. But right now, Ohio State's gelling. Will Howard's rolling. They have some of
Mhm.
the best wide receivers in the country, and they're connecting. And recently, the running game was a little bit of an issue, especially playing these like lesser opponents at the start of the season, and we really fixed that. I do think the run game is clicking as well.
Yeah.
So I think offensively, it's going to be really tough to stop the Buckeyes. Will Howard is more of the sort of that game manager type of guy. He's incredibly accurate, and he can make the plays on his feet, but he's not going to like win you games. The good part about Ohio State, if you're an Ohio State Buckeye fan, is they have so many great playmakers around surrounding Will Howard that it's really, really tough. Because if you stop Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ibuka is going to eat. If you stop Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka, Carnell Tate's going to eat.
Yeah.
They got the two-headed monster with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield. It is almost impossible to see. And then the other side of this is the Buckeyes defense is playing phenomenal so
Yeah.
far. There's just so much NFL talent on the defense side. We probably got a first round cornerback, maybe two first rounders on the defensive line, maybe a first rounder in the linebacker safety realm or whatever. So there's just so much talent on the defense, and it's showing up in the numbers too. But I guess the caveat is there: how much have we really played? Last week we played. I keep saying we played Iowa, and we for the most part kind of shut down Caleb Johnson, who I'm extremely high on as a running back in this class. He did get some yards, and he showed that he's still at an NFL level caliber rusher. But Ohio State basically took that part of the game away from them and was able to do it successfully on the defense. So I think the other side of that is Oregon has not sort of lived up to expectations this year. You had the Ashton Genty Boise State game against them. And Dylan Gabriel came in with Heisman like hopeful potential and really kind of hasn't been leading the NCAA in a lot of passing categories. It really hasn't been, except for the last couple of weeks where he started to really become efficient and start doing well. So I think Ohio State sort of seems to be clicking on all cylinders, and Oregon seems to be not sort of living up to where we had them coming into this year, especially on expectations. So numbers wise, feeling wise, and I guess maybe slightly biased, but trying to be unbiased opinion, I think I'll have Buckeyes by quite a bit in this game.
Yeah, I'm not going to be biased. I hate Ohio State more than any team. Actually, Michigan State is my number one. I hate Michigan State, but Ohio State's definitely like right there with them. And they're the best team in the country. Their defense is the best in the country. I'm not a big Howard guy, and I don't think in this game you're gonna really that rushing attack. I think that ability to be there, and he just doesn't have to make a mistake. And I do think his rushing upside though, as from a quarterback perspective, is gonna hurt Oregon. And you know what? Dylan Gabriel is gonna get destroyed in this game. I just think defensively, I think that Ohio State is too good, and you see they're doing that thing that good teams do. And I will give the Ohio State fans crap. Michigan didn't play a very tough schedule last year either. Let's be real. And so like they did not, but Ohio State's doing that great thing. The thing that great teams do is that first half, they kind of play with their food a little bit. They're seeing kind of how the team's going, what their adjustments need to be, whatever. That second half, they're blitzing the hell out of these guys on both sides of the ball. When you're thinking of like the adjustments that they're able to make, that's a sign of a very, very good team. I think they're the best team in the country right now. I don't think it's close, in my opinion. I do think Ohio State has the most talent. It's bot, but it's all right. That's how that's how college football is right now. And I think in this game, whether Oregon gets better later, that's fine. I think they can. I think they're still a top 5 team in the country. I just think Ohio State's too good. And I know it's an Autzen. I know it's going to be a crazy environment, but I just think Ohio State's playing very well right now. And they have the best wide receiver room in the country again. And that's just that's Ohio State, and that's just kind of how we deal with it there. So we appreciate you guys listening. Thank you guys for being patient with us this week as we get this out a little later. We will be back next week. We'll be talking about the Ohio State, probably Oregon game. We got to get that little ribbon there. If somehow Oregon's able to pull the upset, we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next time.